Now, speaking of that too, there's a big, sync and similarity to Jesus one day being resurrected and then walking the earth. Now, they also talk about King Arthur and the knights one day when they are needed to be able to come back. Can you shine a little light on how similar those are? Because that's kind of like Jesus and the angels, and then you have King Arthur and the knights when that time is needed. So I mean,
you're absolutely right. It's such a fun question because it ties into the idea of prophecy and destiny and these reoccurring cycles of time and these reoccurring, reemerging, resurrecting figures that come back when they're needed, right? So we see that with the second coming of Jesus, this idea of the Christ returning, but you also see this in the idea of Arthur, like Arthur's return, these prophesized returns, and not just Arthur, but of course the knights that are with him, and with them come the women too. And what I find very interesting is when you get into the histories or the lineages that King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table would kind of share about, is they all trace their lineage back to a figure called Joseph of Arimathea. Now, that's an important point because when you start to understand who Joseph of Arimathea was, who in many ways was kind of like a Merlin figure for Jesus, a guide, a mentor, a guardian, a protector. He was the uncle, right, of Jesus. What you see is that what was Joseph of Arimathea doing in ancient Britain? He was the one who was responsible for bringing the Grail back to ancient Britain, right? So he brought the Grail back from the Holy Land to ancient Britain. And there's many ways, again, you can interpret what the Grail is. Is it a sacred cup? Is it Mary Magdalene? Is it the divine feminine teachings? All of the above. But it was deeply connected where he returned and brought the Grail back to ancient Britain. And by doing so, it created the covenant of light being anchored and woven into land here, which in many ways opened up the kingdom of heaven, right? Or opened up an Avalonian portal. And then what you see in a later iteration is the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur, they re-emerged, right? So they came from the bloodline of Joseph, Joseph's bloodline was in charge of guarding and protecting the Grail from corruption or the forces that would corrupt. They defended the light and the truth. That was Joseph's mission against Rome and the Jewish state at the time. And then suddenly you have the reemergence of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, who were around the time when invaders were starting to come into ancient Britain with the mission of destroying and corrupting the covenant, the faith, the Grail, the teachings, right? This is where we really see the Church of Rome declare war fully and openly against the Celtic Church, which was the oldest church at the time. And so Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, their main mission, you could say, was to defend the purity of the Grail. So what does that mean? That's an important revelation to realize, is that they were there as figureheads coming from a bloodline that had done this all along, and now it's their turn, it's their time. They were summoned and they were called by divine providence, if not prophecy. And then you think all these different times that the Grail was under threat, right, or the covenant was under threat in ancient Albion, there's always these interesting figures that would arise through history that then tie their lineage into this Arthurian lineage, which is the Joseph of Arimathea lineage. Now, you take that fast forward in today's time, I feel we're due for the reemergence of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. We're redue for this coming or this return of the light from this important lineage that has always been there, guarding these lands, right? And really guarding the Grail. And so I think we're due, because so much of the forces that are on the planet now are both equally luminous and ecstatically beautiful and so powerful and so inspiring. Yet there's also forces of darkness and forgetfulness. And so this is why, as these forces start encroaching on the protections around the Grail, or really start encroaching and trying to pass through the protections of Avalon, these figures and these forces for good reemerge to defend the honor of the Grail. So this, to me, is how I interpret a lot of these prophecies and the return of Arthur. It's not so much that Arthur himself will return, although maybe he will. Be great to meet him. But it's the idea of what and who Arthur represented, what was his essence, what was his energy, what was his mission. And so we're seeing not only this idea of the second coming of the Christ, which also ties into this, but we're seeing the second coming of the Arthurian energy and the Guineverian energy, because it's not just about a small group of men that are going to protect this. It's the idea that it's all of our hearts that open themselves to the Grail. We are now the keepers of this lineage, and it is our sacred duty for the ones that are ready, for the ones that are willing and will say yes, to pass through the realms of Avalon and to defend Avalon from all forces that seek to harm the Grail, or what the Grail truly represents.